My name is Eliza Goldberg, and on behalf of everyone here at Book Passage, I'd like to begin by saying thank you for coming out today and supporting your local independent bookstore. This afternoon, I am honored to introduce esteemed psychotherapist and spiritual teacher, Dr. John Prendergast. In addition to running his psychotherapy practice in San Rafael, Dr. Prendergast has edited 2 previous books, titled Listening from the Heart of Silence and The Sacred Mirror, respectively, and he is the founder and editor-in-chief of Undivided, the online journal of non-duality and psychology. But today, we are celebrating his powerful new book, In Touch, How to Tune into the Inner Guidance of Your Body and Trust Yourself. I've often struggled with advice to trust my gut, knowing that my gut's opinions can be pretty easily swayed by how much sleep it's gotten, how much caffeine I've fed it, or even what day of the week it's deciding to speak up. But in Touch, Dr. Prendergast explains how trusting your gut does not necessarily mean taking its message at face value. Filled with personal anecdotes and guided exercises, In Touch will transform the way you understand and experience your life. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. John Prendergast.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and thanks for coming today. It sounds so formal, doesn't it? Dr. Prendergast. So, what to say? This is a book about the sense of inner knowing. And there are different ways that we know things. Sometimes we know things through thinking, and sometimes we know things through imagery and metaphor, and sometimes we know in a direct way, unmediated by feeling or sensation. And sometimes we know through our body. So I've been working as a therapist for a long time, and sitting with people one-on-one, working in therapy, and also doing spiritual mentoring. And it's something very interesting happens when people start dropping in and getting in touch with what's true for them. And not everyone is sensitive to it, but I find a lot of people are. That the body responds in a particular way. It actually resonates as we start to hone in on what's true for us and our subjective truth. And this can be true about ordinary events and situations and relationships, and it can be true about honing in on who we really are, our deepest nature. So this was fascinating to me, to sit with people and begin to sense, as I sat with them, shifts happening on subtle levels in the interior of the body. And this is something that happened quite unexpectedly. It wasn't part of my training in any way. I hadn't read any books. It's just something that spontaneously arose. And very little has actually been written about it. So that's actually the impetus for writing this book. And after I did the anthology, The Sacred Mirror, which was in 2003, I've been thinking about this book and trying to kind of get the right handle and the right approach. I began doing interviews in 2007, so it was 8 years ago. And I wound up interviewing maybe 20 people and interviewing myself in a way too, like listening and noticing what my experience was as I would sit with people. And so the book is an offering that comes out of this direct experience of sitting with people. And I thought rather than talking about the book, I'd just read some sections of the book with you. And then we can talk about it as well. So I enjoy writing. It's a lot of work. But it was actually a pleasure to write this book, and it's fun to share with you. So I thought I would just read from different sections and talk about them a little bit, and then at the end we can see what kind of conversation comes out of that. So this is This is a few paragraphs from the introduction. Our inner knowing may be fleeting or quietly persistent, and it is more sensation than thought. We feel it somewhere deep inside of ourselves, often in the heart area or the belly. It doesn't explain or justify itself. It is frequently unbidden and unexpected. It can be deeply reassuring and soothing, or on occasion, it can be very unwelcome, rocking the boat, making waves and turning our life upside down. Sometimes we may not want to know what we know. The truth can be very inconvenient. It can end marriages, friendships, and careers, and disrupt families, spiritual communities, and governments. It is also very liberating to live in accord with this truth. It's a two-edged knife that cuts us out of our comfort zone and opens us to life as it is. I have my first chapter is called The Science of Attunement, and I'm not going to read from it, but attunement is a key theme of the book, learning how to tune in to ourselves and to others. This requires a listening, a deep listening, and it's helpful if we've been listened to by others, especially growing up. But also as adults, if we're attuned with, we learn how to attune with ourselves. And there's a lot of interesting scientific research on the phenomena of attunement and resonance. Intrapersonally, attunement in terms of our interior sensing, and also attunement with one another as well. But I'll skip that chapter. So the second chapter is on felt sensing, the subtle body. And felt sensing, for those of you who are familiar with psychotherapy, is a term that was coined by Eugene Gendlin, and who wrote the book Focusing. It was a great discovery. Felt sensing is a whole body, pre-verbal whole body sense of something that's vague at first. And it's the capacity for felt sensing is something that we all have, but most of us aren't very in touch with. So I have the chapter talking about felt sensing and also the subtle body. So this is one of the things about this book is I wanted to share some anecdotes of my work with people, and that kind of fleshes it out. It makes it more palpable. So this is a little anecdote of my work with one of my clients, and this is a pseudonym, which I use in most cases of the book, describing what would be a spontaneous form of felt sensing. Candace tended her beautiful garden and wide network of friends and family with equally deep care. She was gradually learning to include herself in this caring embrace. She was one of those naturals that felt sensing, but instead of felt sensing, she called it listening to my oracle. It was easy to see why. Once she settled into our sessions with her dream journal and water bottle close at hand, she would offer a casual internal weather report, sometimes with sighs and often with self-amused, vibrant laughter. Then, as she would start to listen more carefully to herself, unexpected images, intuitive connections, and deeper questions would arise. Today she wondered out loud about the purpose of her life, with all its frequent errands and busyness. I invited her to slow down and sit with her question, which she did for a minute in silence. She said, with a note of surprise. Her pace of speech and thought slowed, and the flow of images and body sensations began to emerge. I felt like I was sitting next to a sparkling stream in the High Sierra. The oracle was coming online. Here's her description. So this is what she wrote about her session, describing it. And softly, the images began to flow. Quiet, poetic images. I see my heart. It has been pierced by a huge sword. I feel that this is my past, the suffering. But now I am told I'm here to soften the heart. But the heart is the threshold of all that I want, peace, harmony, knowing all things to be radiant. The heart must be allowed to soften and to shine. I follow the sword out of my heart. I pull the sword out of my heart. I feel like King Arthur pulling out the sword in the stone. I know that I hold knowledge in my hand, that the portal to the essence of my being has been suffering, pierced heart. But now to allow the true heart to shine and be radiant, the heart only needs to soften. Then the heart glows. It's all I need. I say, I don't know why I, of all people, did not know that the small gesture is huge. There is not so much I have to do. Access to the core of being is in the smallest gesture, the sitting down, the breath. So that's the end of her description. Candace gently laid her hand over her heart area. It's not about doing anything great or special, she said. My life can be very ordinary. In fact, it is how I live it. Can I fully accept my life just as it is? She stopped to briefly ponder the question. Now that would be extraordinary, she said, with a note of awe in her voice. And then, after another pause, she added, you know, the only teaching I need, the one I keep next to my bed, is this one. And this is a quote from Adyashanti. The spiritual task we are given is a simple one, to attend to that inner spark of radiance, to hold vigil over it until we realize it to be ourself, and to dig up and cast off all arguments we have with its love. It's a beautiful quote, isn't it? So in the latter part of this chapter, this is kind of an unusual book because I talk about neuroscience and I also talk about the chakras. You don't see too many books that include both of those. But they're both relevant, you know, and they're both related, interestingly. So I give a brief description of the energy body and of the energy centers, of which there are 7, you probably know. And the first is at the base of the spine, the root chakra. And it's very concerned with safety and security. So I describe a little bit about that. The terror of psychological annihilation and the terror of physical annihilation are closely linked. Although the two are distinct, they tend to overlap, since our sense of self is so strongly identified with our physical body. As we start to awaken from the trance of the separate self, it can feel like we're losing all of our familiar ground and all of our points of reference. It can feel like we are dying. In a certain sense, we are. We are dying to who we think we are. We are dying as an apparent separate self, as an object among other objects, as an idea. The conditioned mind can confuse this dissolution of the self with actual physical death. It will project old stories and their accompanying feelings onto this unknown, empty openness. The dark, vibrant silence of no self may take on the guise of an abandoning or engulfing parent. One of my clients with a history of abandonment encountered this vast space and envisioned herself as an astronaut whose lifeline had been cut from their mother's ship as she spun away into the dark, cold void. Another client with a history of engulfment experienced the same dark space to be fiercely invasive and devouring. Sometimes we can see through these veils of projection quickly. Other times we will strongly recoil and then slowly work through them. A lot depends upon the readiness and interest of the explorer. It takes courage to go forward when we have this kind of psychological background. There's a reason that most of us do not easily discover our true nature. The conditioning against this can be quite strong. Above all, as an apparently separate self, we want to be safe. In the end, though, we discover that our deepest safety comes from trusting our own open awareness. Everything else that we rely on falls away. Even the earth shudders and cracks open at times. I suspect that aside from the obvious terror that earthquakes induce on a physical level, they're also deeply disquieting the psyche for another reason. If we can't trust the solidity of the very earth upon which we stand, what can we trust? What is our deepest ground? So interestingly, when people start getting in touch with this kind of terror, you can feel the shakiness at the base of the spine and in the legs as well. There'll be sometimes trembling, sometimes streaming of energy, a sense of being ungrounded, and it can be very, very frightening. And so we avoid it. We avoided it. We're just very conditioned, to avoiding that degree of terror. But interestingly, if we begin to lean into it and open to it, it transforms. Some of you may not have come for a talk like this, but maybe some of you did. So the body's like a musical instrument in potential. It's tremendously sensitive. It's capable of resonating and attuning, but we have a lot of conditioning, a lot of reactive feelings, a lot of very dense beliefs, and this I think of as noise in the system. It's very hard to hear the signals of the body if there's a lot of noise. So I have a few chapters about working with what I call noise and being with experience and taking our difficult experiences as opportunities to go more deeply, actually. And my experience has been the most challenging experiences we have hold hidden gifts for us. Like they have the qualities that are missing if we're willing to go through the sense of some lack. So here's an example of that. This is from chapter 3, entitled Being with Experience, Shadows as Portals. Rose had attended a retreat that I co-led a few years before and felt ready to come in for a series of individual sessions. During our first meeting, she reported feeling burdened by a deep sadness, which she had carried her whole life, despite having a good marriage, close relationships with her adult children, and a satisfying career as an artist. She was afraid that the depth of her sadness would swallow her if she opened up to it. She said that it felt like an extremely dense weight was in the center of her chest. Remember, any of you ever had that experience? After she shared a bit of her family of origin history, which centered around having a highly preoccupied mother who was emotionally distant and unavailable, I had a sense of where we needed to go. Knowing that Rose trusted me and feeling the immediate rapport that we had established, I asked her if she'd be willing to let herself feel and sense this deep sadness and intense contraction in the heart area as she simultaneously maintained a soft gaze with me. This is something I do when I sit with people. It's just quiet and meditative gazing. She immediately agreed, and we dove into the sadness together. I encouraged her to feel her sadness and to sense the sharp contraction in her chest fully as she maintained the current of contact with me. There was an immediate deepening of attention. The pain sharpened, and she began to cry. She felt an intense wave of shame pass through her about being so emotionally vulnerable and needy. She felt like an unloved and unlovable little girl who was completely exposed. She also felt deeply seen and held with kindness and understanding by me. After a few minutes, the contraction softened and her tears stopped. Rose reported sensing a growing lightness in her heart area, a lightness that I also felt. Her eyes gradually cleared, and she smiled beautifully. She knew that her story of being unlovable was untrue. She also experienced a luminous sense of being. I felt as if I was witnessing an inner sunrise. Rose's most shadowed area within her body, the center of her chest where the painful contraction was, turned out to be a direct portal to a sense of radiant being. What she most feared embracing became the entry point to an essential sense of self. How can the most emotionally painful areas of our inner experience yield such light? Could there be an essential radiance within our darkest places? In this chapter, I'll explore how to be with our conditioned experiences, particularly difficult feelings and sensations, in a way that liberates them. Apparent obstacles become, as Rose discovered, doors to awakening. So what I'm talking about is I intersperse different little experiments through the book to kind of sit with, little inquiries and little meditations as a way to be with our experience more intimately. And it's interesting, I had only a handful of sessions with a client who I'm calling Rose, but that density in the center of her just never returned. It was interesting. She was just lighthearted and greatly unburdened after that single session. It was quite striking. So in addition to learning how to be with difficult feelings and sensations, it's also important to question our core limiting beliefs, because often they're related. Often these beliefs from childhood, they're generated subconsciously or unconsciously, but they have a very strong impact somatically. We can feel them as contractions in the body, and often as emotional reactions, such as shame, such as rage, such as terror. So being able to know what our kind of program is, our core limiting beliefs, and be able to question them is very important. So I have a chapter on questioning core beliefs. If you're going to question your beliefs, it's important that you really want to know the truth. This may not always be the case. Often we're more interested in safety, comfort, and pleasure. Your willingness to explore will directly impact the depth of your discovery. Your inquiry is most potent when it is full-hearted. As you enter this self-investigation, it's important to ask yourself how much you're interested in the truth, and to be honest with your answer. Deep inquiry strips away layers of falsehood. You may not want to be so naked. If our inquiry stays on the level of the mind, it has limited impact. For example, cognitive therapy engages the rational mind to challenge irrational beliefs. This can offer a certain level of relief. However, how often have you thought, I know this doesn't make any rational sense, but I still feel this way? Does anyone have that experience? It's very common. I hear this from my clients all the time. It's as if our adult self already knows better, but there's an inner child who remains unconvinced. There's a good reason for this. As I mentioned earlier, almost all of our core limiting beliefs originate in childhood. Based upon very limited information, resources, and understanding, these simple beliefs are emotionally charged and deeply embedded in the body. They are largely subconscious or unconscious. As a result, they do not easily yield to rational analysis. They have to be approached with something other than our rational thinking in order to be seen through fully. Fortunately, our inner knowing, our heart wisdom, is able to penetrate this level of conditioning. Over the years of working with clients, I've found that if people bring attention to the heart center, get quiet, and consult their deepest inner knowing, a powerful transformative wisdom will arise. So I'm not going to go into the particular method, but I'll just describe it very briefly. Let's say you have the belief that you're not good enough, you're not enough. Often it will start, I'm not this enough, that enough, I'm not beautiful enough, I'm not intelligent enough, I'm not charming enough, I'm not young enough. We can fill in the blanks, right? Whatever it is, we'll find usually some area of deficiency. So, but the core belief there is that something is fundamentally lacking, or alternatively, something's flawed, something's wrong with me. And almost all of our limiting beliefs can be traced back to these two. So if we sit with the belief, bring our attention to the heart area, and ask very innocently, what's my deepest knowing about this? And be quiet. It's really interesting what happens. We're not going to the mind, the rational mind. We kind of know the answer there already. But if we go deeply into the heart and get quiet, something will come. It may be an image, it may be a word, it may be a simple knowing. It'll be nuanced as well. But it's a beautiful way to see through our limiting beliefs that anchors so many of our reactive feelings as well. So I said a little earlier that the body's like a musical instrument and capable of this deep resonance, but there's often a lot of noise in the system. So it's hard to hear the signals. So what are the signals? What are the typical signals? This has been very interesting for me to sit with people and kind of begin to recognize certain common signals that people are attuning. They're getting in touch with themselves. And I've noticed 4 broad categories of them. So I have a little introduction to part 3, which is called Hearing the Signals, Somatic Qualities of Inner Knowing. Recently, my wife, who's here, and I took she's here, it's not in there. Recently, my wife and I took a hike in the High Sierras. The beginning of the route was not obvious, but as we gradually ascended the granite ridge, I began to notice small piles of stones called cairns marking the way. Have you noticed, those of you who hike, sometimes you'll see them on Mount Tam too, but most often in kind of granite areas of the High Sierra. The 4 bodily, oh, by the way, that's the symbol on the cover of the book. It's a cairn. It's a Scottish word. The 4 bodily signals of inner knowing: relaxed groundedness, inner alignment, open-heartedness, and spaciousness are like these cairns. They are markers on the path, helping to validate and guide those of us who are learning to recognize and trust our inner knowing. It's important to realize that these markers are not an end in themselves. The goal is not to collect bigger and better cairns. Rather, these markers lead us to something much more precious, our inner knowing. They are our body's way of telling us that we're on the right track. While knowing is prior to any sensation, our body participates in this knowing in subtle and recognizable ways. Everyone's wired a little bit differently and will experience this bodily knowing uniquely. I will explore the qualities of relaxed groundedness, inner alignment, open-heartedness, and spaciousness as if they are distinct. In fact, they are interrelated. They are facets of the same diamond of inner knowing. As you attune with your truth, you may notice one of them or more than another. Each is an equally valid pointer to who we really are. So I'll read a little section from each of these markers or pointers. The first is a sense of relaxed groundedness. And you may consult your own experience about this. When you felt like you really tapped into something that's true for you on some level. It could be a truth about a relationship, it could be truth about career, about moving, it could be great things or small things. There's a sense of something there's a relief inside. And a sense of tension dropping down, like, whew, a sense of grounding as well. So relaxed groundedness is the first quality. There's a lot to say about the ground, different levels of the ground and false ground, but I'll just read a small section. We try to hold ourselves up and in as a way to survive. We instinctively and reflexively pull our attention up from the physical ground and in from the exterior of the body in order to be safe. For example, we naturally tense when we're afraid of potential physical danger. We're physically wired to anticipate and avoid it. Consider how you subtly tighten when you're about to cross a busy street, and how you relax when you cross. Our deeper tension, however, is chronic and psychological. We're conditioned to try to control how we appear to others. We want to maintain an acceptable image within our tribe, whether that tribe is our immediate family, circle of friends, or our community. When we scratch the surface of a well-educated modern human, we find a tribal member. There's a biological fear behind this concern for self-image. Outcasts never fared well in tribal societies. Shunning meant almost certain death. When I explore my clients' social anxieties around acceptance and approval, there's always an underlying fear of rejection. You might think about this in your own experience. Once they uncover this layer, I will ask, then what will happen? Right? They uncover the anxiety. They inevitably discover a fear of being abandoned, becoming homeless, and eventually dying. Do any of you have that? You don't have to raise your hand. But it's interesting. If you go into your anxiety and say, and then what, and then what, and then what, person after person will say, you know, I'll be rejected, I'll be abandoned, and I will be homeless. And then I'll die. It's like you go through layers of rejection and abandonment. In most cases, a secure middle-class lifestyle does not seem to lessen this primal fear. So even living in Marin, it's still there. There are still subtler and more powerful fears around releasing the chronic inner grip upon ourselves. We may lose control, become disoriented, and not know who we are. Essentially, it's a fear of the unknown. We tend to choose a known suffering over an unknown freedom. This is a really important point. We tend to choose a known suffering over an unknown freedom. If I am not a contracted, separate self, what am I? What will happen if this tight fist, this inner contraction that relates to my core sense of self, lets go? Will I fragment and go insane? Will I be able to function in daily life? Will I disappear? These are questions that people ask. It's like, who's going to run the show if I let go of who I think I am? Control is very, very important to us psychologically, and we think we have all of it. Guess how much we have? What I can say. So it's frightening to let go of who we think we are. And it can feel like a free fall. It's like no ground. So we avoid it, we resist it, but it's always there. If we let go, if we relax into it, if we trust into this apparent groundlessness, it opens up. It always opens up, and we find a different kind of ground. It's quite beautiful. It takes a lot of courage. So the second quality is a sense of inner alignment. And again, kind of check your own experience. When it feels like you're in touch with your truth, I have this experience, and many of my clients do as well. There's a sense of kind of lining up inside. Things line up as well. There's a sense of verticality. And interestingly, people, when they get in touch with their truth, they actually start sitting up more. Check your own experience. Like you get, a lot of clients come in and are, they're kind of listing like a sailboat, to one side or the other. And then they start kind of honing in, and it's like, it's like, this is what's true for me. And they start sitting up. It's very interesting. It's like the body will align with a current, an inner current. And this current is in all of us. So I have a little section called Verticality in the Current of Life. When we get in touch with our truth, we feel more inwardly aligned, vertically upright, in our integrity. Integrity is very important. As we are more in our integrity, we feel this sense of inner alignment. In our integrity and alive, there is a subtle yet clear sense of things falling into place and lining up inside. These qualities relate to what I call the current of life. This powerful current is like a great underground river that flows vertically through the core of the body. It's a life energy that runs through each of us, and yet is greater than any of us. The more we're in our truth, the easier it is to sense. Even if we don't sense it directly, we can recognize it indirectly as a sense of inner harmony and vibrancy. We just feel more alive in our core. This is a sign that we're tuning in and on track with our truth and our inner knowing. Third quality that I talk about is probably a pretty obvious one, which is open-heartedness. When we get in touch with our truth, our heart's open. feel grateful, loving, appreciative. There's a sense of warmth and expansion in the heart area. So about this I write, open-heartedness is one of the most easily recognizable markers of inner knowing, so it's not just the gut. The human heart is a keenly sensitive area of feeling and knowing that is a portal to our deepest self. Heart wisdom is a blend of deep feeling and understanding. Without discernment, love is easily blinded by desire. You know about that? The heart area closes in face of early emotional abuse and neglect, as well as in response to the normal challenges and stresses of daily life. It reopens when it's met with steady, attuned love. Self-acceptance, self-love, and self-care free us from our egocentricity and open us to the whole of life. The mind can only accept conditionally, but the heart accepts unconditionally. Another very interesting point. The mind can only accept conditionally. It's always bargaining. It always wants something in return. I'll give you this, will you give me that? That's the strategic mind. That's what the mind is made for. But the heart just gives. Right? It doesn't have a bargain. We do not need to try to love or accept ourselves. It's enough to attune with the love and acceptance that's already here. This is another important point. This unconditional loving is actually our natural way of being. It's here. It's covered, often obscured, sometimes very difficult to access, but it's there. So in the uncovering of the heart, we find its natural state of being unconditionally loving. As our attention deepens into the heart, subtler dimensions unfold. The deepest dimension of the human heart, sometimes called the soul, feels like a sacred temple. This is how people talk about it. It's like, oh my goodness, I'm in the deepest place here. And it feels like a temple. It is here that we experience the greatest human intimacy, love, compassion, and joy. The human heart opens into a non-localized great heart that is capable of embracing the suffering of humanity. Discovering and consciously living from both the great heart and the soulful depths of the human heart brings the deepest happiness as human beings. They're both really important. That deep personal intimacy, there's a sense of the sharing, open-hearted, innocent sharing and gratitude is so nurturing to us as human beings. And then there's an impersonal intimacy, a transpersonal intimacy, a sense of connectedness with all beings and all life. And both are very important for our happiness. So the fourth quality that, I'm really getting a lot of sticky notes here, piling up, is a sense of spaciousness. As we attune with our inner knowing, with our inner truth, we start feeling more spacious. We feel more space inside our body, we feel more space around our body. So here I write, identifying with our body, mistaking it for ourself, obscures the sense of inner space even more than identifying with our thoughts does. Just as open-mindedness allows for a greater sense of space, so too does open-bodiedness. The feeling of openness in and around the body. I wonder if this unusual term might ever enter ordinary usage, such as, have you met Lucy? She's has a wonderful open-bodied approach to life. Or perhaps the opposite. Yes, I agree. Darren is not very open-bodied. Then you change when we talk about it. Although it sounds strange to the ear now, who knows a century from now. I think the word empathy was coined in the beginning of the 20th century. It was kind of a translation from the German Einfühlung. But, new words appear. Maybe this one will. While the term open-bodied is not important, the experience of feeling open space in and around the body is. Most of us don't pay a lot of attention to the sensations inside our bodies unless we're hungry, injured, or ill. We tend to see our body as something very solid and dense. Yet, as we have learned from Dan Siegel's description of interoception in Chapter 1 and Eugene Genlin's discovery of felt sensing described in Chapter 2, our bodies have a tremendous native sensitivity and intelligence. As we discover the value of tuning in to the interior of our body, we also begin to realize that our body is not as solid as we imagine. It is, in fact, filled with space. So all of these four signals and others of them, are pointing us to our inner knowing. And so the final section of my book is called The Fruits of Inner Knowing, and I have two chapters. One is called Self-Recognition. Our body's deep sensitivity is calling us home. Yet home is not somewhere, somewhen, or something other than what is already wholly present now. Our true nature is not some inner state that will be found in the future. It's always here and now, unbounded by space or time. It can never be objectified. Further, the heart of the one who is looking, the apparent separate self, is what is being looked for. Nisargadatta Maharaj said it most succinctly, the seeker is the sought. This wisdom teaching is very puzzling for the linear mind that thinks in terms of someone attaining something, for those of you who are spiritual seekers. A student of the Indian sage Ramana Maharshi once asked for help to find his true nature. "You're like a man standing in his living room asking how to get home," Ramana replied. "We are already home. We just don't realize it. Infinite awareness is shining through your eyes as you read this, and as you listen to this. You're not who you think you are." Take a moment to open up to this possibility. Okay, we're getting there. Two more little readings. So my final chapter is entitled The Great Intimacy. And I think this is what our inner knowing is bringing us to be more intimate with life and ourself in the deepest sense. I'll read a little bit from a prior paragraph. Each relationship has varying degrees of closeness depending on our mutual resonance, roles, attraction, familiarity, and trust. And they can happen on different levels: physical, emotional, mental, energetic, and spiritual. Subtle and complex bonds form over time based upon these interactions. They can be nurturing, ambivalent, indifferent, or destructive. Some are short-term and volatile, others are long-term and relatively stable. All of them change. While we can and do meet others in all of the objective ways I've described above, an essential meeting always happens in the heart. By essential, I mean deepest and most intimate. Yet what is this that we call the heart? When I initially investigate this place, quote unquote, it feels like a center of warmth inside my chest. Think of someone you love right now and notice how you feel. Take a minute. Just think of someone you love. Maybe your dog. Maybe your partner. And notice what you feel. A friend. Family member. If we explore this feeling more thoroughly, however, you will not find a center or periphery. This apparent meeting place dissolves. There's only openness, intimacy, and unbounded love. We discover something beyond our limited self, something universal. And it's here that we must truly meet. In order to meet others in this most intimate way of ways, we must first be at home within ourselves. Our relationship with others is rooted in our relationship with ourselves. If we are not intimate with ourselves, it's impossible to do so with others. A very important point. Self-intimacy comes from profound self-acceptance. If we take ourselves to be either an inflated or deficient somebody, we're not at home, and our contact with others will be partial. To the degree that we're trying to fill a hole in ourselves, we're not entirely at home. nor are we at home in ourselves if we're desperate to be seen or to remain hidden. If we're lost in the fear of abandonment, attack, or engulfment, we're far from home. If we're caught in a caretaker identity, one who cares for others as an unconscious strategy to be cared for, we're also not fully at home. The more we take ourselves and others to be objects, the further away from home we are. There seem to be endless ways to be homeless while we appear to be in a relationship. Yet as Ramana Maharshi pointed out, we're always at home. We just don't realize it. All of the kinds of inner homelessness that I just described are forms of self-forgetfulness. As Byron Katie would say, it's just innocent confusion. When I'm at home in myself, I meet you in and as myself. This is beyond Martin Buber's description of an I-thou relationship. It is I. This does not mean that differences are ignored or erased. There is a clear recognition, respect, and even celebration of the distinctive views, feelings, and needs of others. It's not a psychological merging. It is the recognition that the apparent I here and the apparent you there share the same ground of being. As being, you are an expression of myself. As being, I am an expression of yourself. This is true communion. In the same way that we're connected with all biological life through our shared DNA, we are connected with all of life through our shared being. We are like different trees that share the same ground. Are we the tree or the ground? Yes. We are unique and not separate, neither two nor one. These words are crude pointers to our direct inner knowing. Okay. Final small piece from the conclusion. Our body is a trustworthy conduit of inner knowing, far more than the conditioned mind, which is so easily seduced by ideas. It is closer to the ground from which it springs and to the pulse of life. It has a remarkable capacity for felt sensing, the whole body sense of things, the far reach of which includes our inner truth. As our body is freed from conditioned thoughts and reactive feelings, it becomes an increasingly fine-tuned instrument for being in touch with reality. There are multiple somatic markers of inner knowing. In this book, I focused on the 4 most common that have emerged during tens of thousands of client sessions over the past 3 decades. These 4, a relaxed groundedness, inner alignment, open-heartedness, and spaciousness, have appeared repeatedly as I've both guided and followed hundreds of my clients and students during their unfolding process of self-discovery. Dozens of interviews with friends, students, colleagues, and former clients confirm these observations, so does my own experience. As we tune into our deepest nature, our body relaxes, grounds, lines up, opens up, and lights up. So far, this extraordinarily useful subtle feedback has been largely overlooked. Almost nothing has been written about it. We need to both sense and decode these signals if we are to benefit from them. These bodily markers are here to be seen and used as guides to enable us to more gracefully navigate life and to awaken. They're part of our birthright, available to anyone. As the body awakens, so does the world. When we discover that the core of the body is made up of empty, vibrant, and wakeful openness, we experience the world differently. The world as other dissolves and becomes intimate. As a result, our ordinary experience is suffused with a sense of the sacred. We discover what I like to call the sacred ordinary. We feel grateful for no reason. Well, there it is. Thanks for listening. So we can open it up to questions.
Yeah, time for a couple questions. So.
Yeah, we'll take a few questions and then I'd be happy to sign books. Yes, please.
Would you give an example of what person might has said that you remember when they find out other than what they think they are?
What did they say?
Yeah.
They have a big laugh. Because, well, not always, you know. Often there's a sense of wonder. It's like, oh my God, I had no idea. You know, this wakeful awareness has always been here, and it hasn't been recognized. And now I know this as myself. So we identify with our name, right? Name is like a name tag. We identify with our history, we identify with our gender and our various, beliefs and feelings. And they're all part of our relative identity, but they don't actually define who we are. And they don't confine who we are. We're like players on the stage, we have our roles to play, but we're not the role. We're something other, something greater than that. So the words will be different, the experience will be different. Sometimes it's really a huge revelation, sometimes it's very, very modest, quiet. But I would say that the hallmark is a sense of inner freedom and a sense of wonder as well. I mean, I can remember when there was really I experienced really a series of these openings, and one of them afterwards, I was on a meditation retreat and I was walking in the forest at night, which kind of sounds a little insane, but it's something I really enjoy doing, walking in the dark, and I just started bursting out laughing. It was like the joke was on me. I'd taken myself as this little somebody, and it was just so obviously untrue. And it's because I believed my story of who I was. So that's why I answered first. It was a big laugh, because that was my experience. Great question. Please.
Yeah, thank you, John, for your reading, and thank you for the book. And when I finished your book, I was just curious. I won't say what mine was publicly, but I wondered if there was some truth that was a catalyst for you to finally write a book, or a truth that was derived having written the book for you?
Well, I think it's kind of an emerging truth, and it. Sometimes I say the book was writing me in a way. It was very important in writing about inner knowing that it not be about inner knowing, but be from inner knowing. So it was really important that it resonate, that it feel authentic for me in a very important way. So in the writing, I was really ultimately writing for myself, for my own sense of authenticity. And in doing so, I think there was a clarification in the process. Right? It's like when you have to explain something or write something, it makes you get really clear about it. Not just clear mentally, but clear here, clear somatically. It needed to really deeply vibrate as true. And I would go through and edit and edit and edit to get it as economical and as clear and as beautiful, actually, as I could. And I think that's paralleling an internal clarification that was happening as well. And so I think as a result of writing the book, I'm clear. And there were many little steps and stages that preceded the writing of the book. I wrote several introductory chapters over the years, and as soon as I would finish them, I would discard them. It's like, well, that's not it. Clearly, that's not it. But it was useful to do that writing. So there's a lot of discarding, a lot of clearing of noise in a way, to hear the signal of what this is about, as well as a sense of inner knowing. Thank you. Next question. Yes?
Question. How do you remind yourself throughout the day to come back to center? You get involved in cell phones and whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, how do you get back in alignment? What is your...
It's a great question. I mean, people do it very differently. Like I had one client put a rubber band around his wrist, it's like, or with cell phones now you put little timers on them as well. But I think probably what's useful in general is to take little breaks during the day. To ask yourself, do I really need to be doing this? Right? Do I have to go there? Do I have to get this? Do I really need to check my cell phone, or check Facebook or whatever it is? What would it be like actually to sit for 5 minutes and take a breath? And it's interesting, just that kind of quiet sitting and breathing, letting attention drop down into the heart, into the belly, and like, oh, what's here? Right? It's a good beginning place as well. But life, offers endless opportunities, usually in the form of some kind of suffering, to pay attention. We get a lot of feedback when we are off course, and so it's actually about learning to listen to those experiences too. If I spend too much time on the screen, my eyes get really tired, and I find my attention kind of getting, it's almost like a car overheating here. When I was a boy, I used to go on summer vacations with my parents, and this would be in the 50s, we'd drive up the California coast or Oregon, go camping, and we'd go up one of those grades, and the engine would start overheating. My dad would pull over the car until we stopped. So it's good to stop when we feel ourselves overheating. And it's very important to drop attention down. We're so, it's a great example, cell phones and screens and so on, because they're proliferating more and more, aren't they? We're becoming more and more data and information saturated. And in order to process it requires attention, a shift of attention up here. But I'm deeply convinced that if we are going to survive and thrive as a species, we have to make a shift of attention from here to here. This is the great journey, the great pilgrimage, is from the head to the heart and the whole body as well. So our dedication to that, to knowing what's the most important for us also, that's a critical question. What is the most important? What is it that we really want in our lives? That can help sharpen our remembrance, And as I was writing, it's not about getting somewhere, it's actually about being here, knowing, being available, being open. Right? This is where life is, right? This is where the joy is. This is where the deepest gratitude and the deepest freedom. We know this. You're welcome. Yes.
Do you equate the head and heart with left brain and right brain? Right brain being the heart, left brain being the intellect. Right brain being the intuition.
Yeah, there's some relationship there. I think we are more left-brained, aren't we? More in the
No
analytic.
doubt about that.
And so there's something about the balancing of the hemispheres that's probably related with shift of attention more to the whole body as well. In terms of the heart in particular, maybe, I don't know enough to say about that. It does seem when people, there are accounts of, when the left brain goes down and we're just entirely in the right brain, a sense of wholeness and, interconnectivity as well. Yes?
I don't know if this is something you can answer here, but I went to a talk once, a spiritual talk, and I've had a lot of back pain in my life, and my upper back was really hurting that night, and the teacher spoke about allowing,
Yeah.
and in the middle of his talk, my back hasn't done this since or before, but went pop, and the pain was gone,
Yeah.
which was a pretty good sign that I need to practice allowing more. So how would I transfer that into, having more of that in my life?
Yeah. Well, that's a wonderful.
Not just that one time and a good
Right.
memory.
That's what a wonderful lesson. Right. Well, this is really a key element, which is allowing our experience to be exactly as it is, and which means we get out of judgment. Because judging ourselves and others just creates separation and tension. Whatever we're judging resists being judged. We don't like to be judged, and whatever's happening inside of us doesn't like to be judged either. So we begin to realize that accepting what is sort of the royal road as well. And that means if we have a pain, for instance, something is concrete, if we're trying to change the pain, there's going to be resistance. But if we're actually willing to accept it as it is, we're not in a fight with it, and then things can move. And that's true emotionally and physically, that's true in relationships. There's a deep wisdom in this kind of radical acceptance as well. So, how to practice it, right? You can practice it any moment and all moments, as a kind of self-remembrance. And to notice if you're not accepting, right? If you're in judging as well. And often that's the case. It's very interesting when I work with people, you know, they have the thought, I should not be experiencing this. I should not be feeling this way. Right? And then gradually that softens. And then the question is not what I should or shouldn't be feeling, but what am I feeling? What is my actual experience? And then we become curious, right? And then a quality of what I would call affectionate attention begins to come forward. And affectionate attention is the most potent, liberating force in human experience. It's the key, really. Yeah.
I think that we should switch to signing, but thank you so much for all of your wisdom today.
You're welcome.
You're welcome. Let's give a round of applause.